Sorry.
No problem. Okay.
Yeah.
Everybody good with volume?
Okay, does it look okay over there? Ohio, Columbus, Ohio. Yes. Okay, I think I see some nods. All right, so this is Building Healthy Practice Techniques. As you already know, I am out here in Memphis, Tennessee. I teach at the University of Memphis Applied Music, Chamber Music, Pedagogy, and I'm originally from Dallas, Texas, and I'm going to just spend a little bit of time telling you about myself and the 4 states I lived in, one of those being your state, the great state of Ohio. The other one is where I'm currently am, Texas, and I also have spent some time in Florida. Here's a few photos of me from my earlier days when I was a young student there, and then also a college student. I'm sure you can see that one. And then as a high school student. So piano has been a part of my life for a long time, and it's always kind of fun to look back now as professionals of where we've come from. I went to SMU as a college student in Dallas, Texas. As I mentioned, I did live in Ohio, and I went to the Cleveland Institute of Music for grad school. And then I wrapped up at the University of Texas at Austin for my doctorate degree. I tend to identify in 3 different ways: as a concert artist, an independent pedagogue, and a professor, as I'm sure many of you also identify in different ways. And I think that's really important as we think about our health journeys, is how we identify in the spaces that we move through. Here's a few pictures from the University of Memphis. Our students there on the top, if you can see my cursor. This was right before the pandemic, and I'm hopeful that we're endemic and we can get another photo like this again. And then here in the corner is a photo of our piano pedagogy project, where we have the opportunity to go into the schools in the Memphis community and teach students, and they come to our campus for an end of semester recital, and their parents are there, and it's a great way for us to share piano with our local community. As an independent teacher, which I'm sure many of you are, I have taught for, I think, almost 25 years as an independent pedagogue. Obviously, my career has gone in many different ways. So right now I don't teach a lot of independent students, but a few fun photos. Here's myself in my studio, and then a high school master class. You can see these kids are ready to take over the world. And then at the very bottom of the screen, my husband is also a bass trombonist, and we love doing school concerts for kids. And this is everyone bombarding the trombone, because piano is never quite cool as the bass trombone in any setting that we go to. They're always like, how do you make those sounds? And when he pulls out the Charlie Brown wah wah mute, that just takes the cake for the day. So they're all bombarding him to see what the trombone looks like. And it's so fun for us to get to share music with the next generation as well. I also identify as a concert artist, and I think this is actually probably one of the coolest parts of my story, especially once I tell you a little bit about my journey through performance injury. If you're a Devo fan, you might recognize Mark's Mother's Bow there in the corner from the hit song Whip It from the 80s. And that was probably one of the coolest gigs I ever did. We got to dress up in jumpsuits, and Mark Mothersbaugh was the referee, and he conducted his piece for 6 keyboards. And it was an outdoor event. It was really a lot of fun. And I think, all of these pictures are representative of different types of performances, from chamber music to solo. Here in the corner is a vocalist recital that I did afterwards. And it's just, again, it's so wonderful to be able to share music with so many people. And so I've told you a little bit about what my story is, and I always like to kind of have the audience think about what their story is and what has brought you to this point where you are teaching, or however you identify, whether you're a church musician, a professor, or concert artist. And a part of my story, something that's been really important, is journeying through performance injury. And so, just by a show of hands, I want to know how many of you know someone or have heard of someone, or maybe even yourself have had to journey through some type of injury. It doesn't have to be piano related, but any type of injury. Yes, okay, I think I almost see all the hands, right? Through our years and living and life, we're all probably going to encounter some type of injury. Now, whether it becomes debilitating or not, that kind of depends on what the injury is. But for me, my injury was related to my ability to play at the piano. So it started off in pre-college, and I love to start with the pre-college story because I'm sure many of you teach pre-college students. Is that right? Can just a show of hand, how many teach pre-college? Yes. Okay, everybody, right. And so I think that and the pre-college level, sometimes we don't think about it as much, but we can be really influential in a student's life and career if we can identify some of these signs of injury at the beginning when they're very young. So, as a pre college student, I was very ambitious. I wanted to play all of the things, all of the repertoire. I wanted to do the competitions, the recitals, the festivals. And when I was in high school, that was probably the first time that I felt a pain that didn't quite go away. I told my teacher about it. She said to rest, take some ibuprofen, and you'll be fine. And that was true. As a high school student, I was fine after I had rest and over the counter prescriptions was great. As an undergrad student, and I was moving towards performing more and trying to find myself as a musician in the world, I found that these lingering injuries, they actually lasted for a longer period of time. So same thing. I went to my teacher, I asked, what should I do? And this time she mentioned that maybe I should go get a little bit more help. So I went to the clinic, the health clinic on campus at SMU there in Dallas, and I saw the sports doctor. And the sports doctor said basically the same thing, rest, do some ibuprofen, maybe do some additional wrapping of your hand or a sling to immobilize it so that you don't use it too much in your daily life. And at this point, what from when I was a high school student went away in a day or two. As an undergraduate student, it took more like a week or two. Now let's move on to graduate school at CIM. And since you all are in Ohio, I'm sure you are probably somewhat familiar with conservatory culture and the fact that many students practice 6 to 8 hours a day because that's just the thing to do. And maybe even you encourage some of your students who are advancing to practice more. And so I was that student. I wanted to practice more. I didn't even really need a lot of encouragement. I just wanted to do that because it's something I love to do. And in Cleveland, they have the Cleveland Clinic. And I believe they still most likely have a whole section that was dedicated at the time I was in school there to musicians and Cleveland orchestra musicians. And so when I felt pain again as a graduate student, I felt like, oh my goodness, I'm in Cleveland. They have some of the best hospitals in the world here, some of the best doctors. They even have doctors who are committed to injury of musicians. So I went to the Cleveland Clinic and I saw one of the neurologists there. And it was kind of cool because he had a piano in his office. And I never seen a doctor who had a piano in his office. And he had me sit there and play, and he watched my motions and all of that. And I was really expecting like a big aha moment. And he's proceeded to tell me that, well, you have your muscles all riled up. That's the word he used. And you are just going to have to rest. And I thought, oh my goodness, I came all the way to the Cleveland Clinic. This is one of the best hospitals in the world. I'm expecting for a better answer or a different answer or another solution. And so what ended up happening was I did end up doing some additional physical therapy while I was in Cleveland. And the different things they did help. I also did alternative techniques like Alexander technique, and they also helped. And I'm sure that many of you have done some alternative techniques too. And I'd be curious, either by show of hand or you can shout it out to me too, what alternative techniques that you have tried when you've been faced with injury or advise somebody who's faced with injury. Any thoughts?
Acupuncture.
Okay, acupuncture, yeah.
Injections.
Oh, like steroid injections. Yeah. Anything else?
And braces. Braces. And braces.
Yeah,
Got
yeah.
a little,
Oh, say that one
started
more
with
time.
piano. Same thing. I got one of those miniature key pianos to fit my hand better.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. I have one in my office. That's a whole nother lecture. One of the 7/8 keyboards. That's awesome. Yeah, Carol Leone is one of the big opponents of that keyboard, and that's amazing if you can have one of those so that you don't have to stay in extended positions. I'm so glad that you know about that. And those are all amazing. And another thing I did being in Ohio was after I finished my graduate degree at CIM, I actually went to Oberlin and I studied Talman with Bob Shannon. And that also helped me a lot. And I hear many of the things that you all have done. And so at the end of my degree, it took me about 6 months to complete the master's degree. And then I took some time off to do a lot of those things that you all did. I never did the steroid injections, but I did do many other things to try to relieve myself of this constant pain, which, as you might have noticed, from pre-college went from a day or two to undergrad at a week or two to graduate school at several months. And then I proceeded to apply for my doctorate degree at the University of Texas at Austin. Now, how many of you have played at church or at some point have been maybe a full-time church musician? Anybody? Several of you. Okay, so you might know or think that church music is not like playing Rachmaninoff piano concerto, correct? Not as extensive technique most of the time as something like that. It's not music that you would think, oh, I'm going to go injure myself when I go play at church. But that's actually what happened to me. So I was about a year out of, well, actually about 3 years out from graduate school, and I wanted to start playing more. I had been very limited in my time off to not playing more than 5 or 10 minutes a day. And so I thought this would be a great way for me to start playing more regularly with people. They had a church band, so I wasn't carrying the service or anything like that. And after the first rehearsal, I actually lost mobility in my hand. And I'm not sure if you guys can see me because I don't see myself over here, but can you see me over there?
No.
You
If you
can.
stop sharing, you'll be able to.
Am I back? Well,
No.
I'll stop share. Hi, here I am. Okay. Yes, these are the things about Zoom World I don't know. I'm having the best conversation with myself over here. So I lost mobility in my hand to here. So I couldn't move my hand more than octave anymore. After just a couple of services in church, after not playing for several years. And at this point, I really was feeling like, this is over. I need to stop playing piano. I mean, this is at this point from, age 16 to at the time, probably I was about 25. It's not worth it to me anymore. I need to find another career. And I was 1 year into my doctorate degree. And that's when I heard about something called muscle activation techniques. And I have a whole slide, but since you guys can't see me, it might be better if I just talk to you like this and pull the slides up a little bit later. So I have some links and you all can check those out. But muscle activation techniques is a modality that uses the hand at the nerve endings to turn them back on. And so by this point, I failed to mention, but I had also been in several car accidents. I had lost mobility to turn my neck to the left. I was not able to stand for more than 10 to 15 minutes because I had developed plantar fasciitis in my feet, patellofemoral syndrome, and so many other ailments that a 20-something year old probably should not have. And so it was getting to be more than just I can't play piano, but I can't live my life. And so I was really at rock bottom after that church service and thinking like, what am I going to do when I heard about this technique? And so I'm happy to say now it's been more than a decade that I've been treated by this technique, and I've been fully recovered for quite some time. And it's been extremely restorative, not just for me to play piano, but also for me to live and to do my entire life. So I will send that in a email so that you can see the link. But here, let's see if I can go back and forth. So sometimes you can see me and sometimes you can see my slides. So a few things have happened, since then. I got my life back, my career back, and all of those things. I'm not sure, do you all see my slide or not? Maybe not. Is it there? No. Zoom world. Okay. I will have to look for it. So there's lots of photos there. Maybe I could just email it to you, but there's pictures of, me being able to perform and do the things that I love, which is really important. And I hope that the story is inspiring to people who have suffered from injury or know people that are suffering from injury to continue to seek alternative techniques. And so what I'm going to do today is talk about how to build healthy practice techniques based off of the modality of muscle activation techniques. It's really revolutionized my thinking, and many of the things that I offer you, they might be things that you already know, or they might be some new ideas and some new concepts for you to consider. So I'm going to do this. Usually I do a little bit of playing, and I'm gonna just need to take a second to find, where is that slide? I think I found it. Okay, so I'll go back to my PowerPoint now. It's there, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, great. Am I still on the screen too?
No.
Ah, this is sad. Okay, well, here's the link to the muscle activation techniques if you want to take a quick photo of that. So it's just muscleactivation.com. You can find people in your local area who do this modality. And the particular practice that I went to was the continuum method. Those are the photos that I wanted to show you of, me performing post-injury. Several albums, several recordings I was able to do post-injury. So many things. So a photo of a PBS special that I was in that actually kind of talk about my injury recovery and what I've been able to do with my doctorate degree. A performance at Dallas Symphony Orchestra, and just most recently at Wigmore Hall, which was tons of fun. So I'm so indebted to this modality. I believe in it 100%, and I just love what it's not only done for me, but what it's done for my pedagogy. Okay, so here is a new way of thinking, and I think I'll try to go in and out of the PowerPoint. I'm sorry, this is awkward. I thought actually that everybody was going to be on Zoom, so I didn't plan for you all not being able to see me. So I will also be talking about this in levels. So first, starting off with the beginner level, foundational skills, and analyzing new technical motions. So at the beginner level, something that I think is really important is analyzing technical motions. And I don't think I'm going to be able to do this, play it, and you all see it at the same time. So I want you to see the example, and then I will play it and talk through it on this side. Okay, so I'll do the girlet, the morning greeting. I believe I can still look at it. Okay, so in this example, see if on my own screen I can put both of them here. All right. At the beginner level, it's great to think through the chords, especially if you have or incorporate theory into your beginner level students, which I hope that you do. Not only can you identify the chords in this selection, but you can also think about hand shape. So I think a lot of times, at the beginner levels, some teachers are really awesome at talking about technical gestures with easier pieces, but sometimes we forget, including myself. So I think if you can talk about the hand shape that you need for the G major chord like this, and then also using the fingers at the same time for articulation. So let me just play. A couple things to also think about is to identify the scale, because fingering is a huge deal for the young ones to develop good technique from the beginning. And oftentimes they don't think about it. I know that you know this. And also the tie. It's easy to just be like, oh, leave your finger down or hold it. But I think it's really important that they're not actually pressing their finger into the key like some of the little ones like to do, because then we develop unnecessary tension. And we never want unnecessary tension when we're playing. And we can start to encourage those good habits from a very early age or from the very beginning levels of piano playing. The next thing I want to talk about is the Faber's Piano Party Song. And many of you know it, and I think just for myself, I won't go back and forth. I will just play it for you. But this analyzes the motion of crossing over. Now, crossing over is easy enough to do, but we want to make sure that they're not being very tense when they cross over, or that their hand position doesn't have unnecessary tension. So that's a big thing at the beginner level. Here it comes. And even keeping both hands, you might notice, free as you play, encouraging them to keep that freedom in their hands as they play from an early level. And not to do things like, they do these things like this with their fingers all the time, but to encourage them to have a good hand position, which, especially for the little bitties, can be hard to encourage them to do that. But these things really play big dividends as they grow and they develop, having good fingering technique and good finger technique. So now I'm going to go to intermediate repertoire, and I will let you see what I'm going to talk about. You can screenshot it if you like. Okay, so 4 things here at the intermediate level. Choosing repertoire. I think this is huge. Depending on the type of studio you have or the type of parents you have, sometimes we can go from beginning pieces to pieces that are really a little bit too difficult for a student, and they can skip some of those fundamental ideas. Then the second thing would be score study and mental practice. I mentioned that a little bit already with the Gurlitt, identifying chords and, there's a scale to connect the dots for students. But this can be a really great way to incorporate theory into your lesson as well. And the third thing would be dynamic versus static stretching. And I'll demonstrate that to you when I come out of this screen. And then practice time increments. So as you might remember in my own story, that, I was practicing a long time. I liked doing that, and that was just who I was. But it's really important from even the young levels to encourage them to understand what they're doing, just not sort of mindlessly practice. I actually have an 11-year-old who's very ambitious, and just the other day she was telling me, oh yeah, I just ran through it a few times, or I did this measure 25 times and I didn't finish the rest of it. No, let's get a practice strategy so that you can be really successful and really mindful about what you're doing in your practice time. So let me go ahead. Oh, and static stretching versus dynamic stretching. This is also very important at this age or this level. Does anybody know the difference between those two terms? What is dynamic versus static stretching? Ooh. I will tell you. So dynamic stretching is when we just do whatever we can do. I'm limited by this box, but let's say I wake up and I do a morning stretch. As far as I can go. Okay, that's great. But let's say sometimes there are those that will encourage stretching where you use an outside force to go a little bit further. So that'd be like if I'm stretching using my hand and I'd say, oh, well, I want to get a little bit more distance on my thumb. And I use my other hand to increase my range of motion. That would be considered a static stretch. And in the MAT world, that's a stretch that we want to avoid. Not because, they want to, limit what you can do by using an outside force, but because we put the body in a vulnerable situation and we don't know if there are compensating patterns that we just don't know are there. I mentioned that I was in a couple of car accidents in that time where I was not playing piano. And something that happened to me was that I didn't have mobility in my neck. So when I would sit at the piano, sometimes I'd be kind of hunched over, or maybe my shoulder would be hunched up. And that was just because that was my body's way of protecting itself. It wasn't because I wanted to have bad form at the piano. And I think sometimes, especially as piano teachers, we can be unaware that compensation patterns in the body actually show up at the piano, but it's the body's way of protecting itself. And so anything we can do to not enhance that or to aggravate that is preferred in this modality. Okay, so I am going to play a couple of pieces from an intermediate level. I'm actually going to do 2 of my own from the 24 African American traditional folk songs. Shameless plug for the book. I wrote 24 African American traditional folk songs as a part of the Hal Leonard series, which has traditional folk songs from all types of ethnicities and nationalities. And we'll talk a little bit about that in the Who's That lecture. So in this example, I have Little David play on your harp. And let me show it to you all. I am so sorry I have to go back and forth. I thought you all were on Zoom, so okay, this is a little awkward. Okay, so here it is, just so you can take a look. And Little David play on your harp. There's a couple of things to watch out for. One is the rest, making sure that you lift the fifths and that you're relaxed, that the student is relaxed in between. And then on My Lord, What a Morning, making sure that you have some motion in the wrist as you play the arpeggiated figures. So let me play them for you now. Okay, so here's Little David play on your harp. Hopefully you can see that there's lift and lightness in between the rest. But I'm sure you all have students that do stuff like this. And they kind of hold on to the bottom of the key. And you want to make sure that they don't do that, right? Because that's unnecessary tension. And that's what we don't want to develop at these early ages. So I'll also play just a little bit of My Lord, What a Morning. And the idea is to keep this rotation going in the hand. So a lot of students will try to stay in an extended position when they have octaves, and you want to make sure that instead of doing that, especially since their hand size might not be big enough to control an entire octave, is that they're actually rotating through and creating these gestures that are free and not limited by the interval. Any questions? I know I'm moving through this fast. Okay, great. You all are awesome, Zoom/hybrid audience. Let's go on to the advanced repertoire, and I will show you my slide. Okay. So at the advanced level, and maybe all of the levels actually, is sitting position. I think we start to feel this in our bodies more as we perform more advanced repertoire. But we want to really make sure that we have the bench at a height that allows us to play the repertoire and also for our bodies to feel the best. Another thing is soreness versus pain. And I want to talk to you all about that, about what that feels like to be sore or to actually have pain. Because I think this is one of the things that was missing in my own study as I went through different teachers, is not being able to identify where that stopping point was. The third thing is sound destination versus the journey. So, as I mentioned, I had a couple of car accidents. I couldn't move my neck. So that limited the way I could approach the key, but I could still find other ways to get the sound that might just not look the way that some people think it should look. And the fourth thing is strengthening away from the instrument. So before I go any further, I'm curious about your own understanding of soreness versus pain. What does soreness feel like versus what does pain feel like? Any thoughts?
Just a general discomfort, some kind of shooting, noticeable eye opening.
Yeah, are you saying that's what soreness feels like?
The soreness would be just a general feeling of discomfort versus more noticeable, sharp pain.
Yeah, I love that. Other descriptions, the more the better.
A muscle soreness will typically go away within a couple of days, but the pain will last longer and will become more intense.
I love that. I love the more we hear, it's like, oh, we don't all describe it the same way. It makes us more alert for when somebody describes it to us to be able to help them process that. Other thoughts? Mm.
You can work through soreness, but pain indicates there's a problem there that needs attention.
Yeah, right. And so now I will tell you the MAT answer. Those are all really excellent answers. So with soreness, I think someone mentioned that it's something that goes away, right? Whether it's a few hours or a day or two, but it's not going to linger for multiple days or even weeks. But also another thing about soreness versus pain is soreness when we work out or if we play for maybe a little bit longer than we used to playing. Soreness could be used to build down the muscles to build them back up so they can become stronger, right? We want that. If you're working out or if you're playing piano and you're growing in your repertoire, you want to become stronger. But pain is something that actually limits you from being stronger. For instance, like at the church gig that I mentioned, I told you all that my hand, I could reach an octave, and then after the church gig, I couldn't even open my hand more than a sixth. That was something that was painful and that I did not need to press through. But I would say that at that moment, I wasn't in excruciating pain all the time. I had just lost my range of motion. So that's another something that's really important to be noticing. Am I losing range of motion? Because some people don't feel pain the same way. If you've ever had a procedure or something, one person says, oh yeah, getting my wisdom teeth pulled, no problem. Next person's like, oh my gosh, it's worse than childbirth. They're like, how is this the same thing? So you have to be really intuitive to the fact that we might not be using the same words. We might have different pain thresholds, but we still might need to be limiting the activity so that we don't push ourselves to injury. So I hope that makes sense. The other thing I want to talk about, let me get out my slide again. Is strengthening away from the instrument. Now, I know this is a very telling question, but how many of you like some sort of exercise away from piano? Anybody do anything? Okay, yeah, okay, what do you all do? Everybody, you all are awesome.
Bodies for just general body, but we do, hand growth rotations and stuff as well.
Yeah. What are the exercises?
Swimming.
That's one of my favorites.
Running, weight training.
Cycling,
Ooh,
yoga.
that's great. Oh, you all are like one of the healthiest MTAs I've ever talked to. Most people are like walking and that's it. Or they're like, oh gosh, I need to do some more exercise. But this is really important for us to strengthen away from the instrument. And I will say, you know, I've had ebbs and flows throughout my life on how much I've done this, but in the MAT and just world in general, the physical training world, it's so important. And I think as pianists, we forget how athletic what we're doing is. It's a sport, playing the piano and playing advanced repertoire. And we want to strengthen our bodies in as many ways as we can outside of the instrument because it will only enhance what we do at the instrument. So it sounds like you all already have it down packed, but that's something you can encourage your students to do if they're not already physically active, is to be active away from the instrument and not to think that everything I do at the instrument is going to make me strong enough to play whatever piece I want to play. Okay, so let's go and play some of these pieces. I'll show them to you first. Maybe not. Let me look for it. Okay, so I have a couple examples here of, oh, first let's talk about the sitting position that I just mentioned. I'm actually on a hydraulic bench. I don't know if you all have those where you are, but instead of showing the slide, I can just show it to you here. But I really like these because one, they're very high. They can also go, very low if you like sitting low, and everywhere in between. They're also much faster than the rolly benches. I think you can get an injury just from trying to roll up the bench. And so this is my preferred bench. I encourage all of my students, if they can, to get hydraulic benches. If you can't, there's also these wonderful squares that you can put under wooden benches to elevate the height. But the height is actually very important, or where you're sitting, it's very important. And I think that sometimes we forget that as teachers, or if we have a preferred height, we kind of assume everybody else likes that height too. So the sitting position and the bench is something that I like to really emphasize in my own lessons and with my students. Let me see if I can skip ahead for time's sake. So this is my example, is the Samuel Coleridge Taylor's 3/4 suite. I think this is going to work. If you don't know this suite, it's a great piece of music. I think that this demonstrates sound destination versus how it looks. So there's many ways that one can produce a fortissimo. You could do it with your body. You can do it with your hands. You could do it with your forearms, your shoulders. And every person, it's going to look a little bit different. And every person, it's going to feel a little bit different. So I am going to show you, now that you've seen it, just how you could use your body to do this. And ideally I like to tell my students that the sound actually comes from our feet. Us leveraging our feet into the piano actually can produce a lot of sound without us having to use our forearms as much. And so you're not going to get the full body experiences. You can only see half of my body, but I'll try to just show you a little bit of that with just the first bar. I'm also always like, how does it sound? Is it even coming across there? But you can get more sound from using your feet. And then, of course, this is related to wellness and injury, because we don't want to only use our forearm or only our hand to produce sound, because that's really dangerous over time. So I like to tell my students to plant their left foot into the floor and leverage their body like this way. And I'm sure many of you have used this example as well. To feel your entire body going into the sound versus doing just the forearms, which would look kind of like this. But if I use my body, and you might not be able to hear the sound difference with the microphone, but you'll at least be able to see visually. So. And that feels a lot better. It feels like I'm utilizing my entire body instead of just my forearms to produce sound. And it's healthier over time. And also it feels good. It sounds good, even though I don't know if it sounds good on the microphone there. But in a hall, in a space, there's a different sound when we're using more of our being instead of just our forearms. So that's another really important tip. And then I'm going to show them all to you. And I think I made it in time for a few questions. Nope. Well, it just doesn't want to happen. So I will actually, I think I will send you the slide with all 10 of the tips there at the end. But while I kind of search for it, does anybody have any questions?
Do you use pedal boxes for small children?
I think that is a wonderful idea. I don't have too many small children that I teach right now, but yes, I would, so that their feet can be leveled and that they're not, reaching forward to try to reach the pedals or even having to stand upright, which means that their forearm is no longer parallel with the keys, but it looks something like that, right? Depending on their size. So yes, I would use the pedal extensions. What else?
Suggestions for when students are starting arpeggios and they play the 5-3-1-1-3-5, they land on a straight pinky instead of like the curved hand. Do you have any suggestions about that? Because they tend to want to do that karate chop, roll over to the side.
Oh yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, I think just to make sure I heard you correctly, you're saying that when students learn arpeggios or chords, they tend to do this, something like that, correct? Yeah. So it depends on their hand size, right? Because obviously as a full-grown adult, it's hard for us to even remember what that feels like, to feel like that weakness in the pinky, like I can't do it. I really like to demonstrate by actually shaping their hand. So if touch is something that the family that you're working with or the student is okay with, I think it's really great to kind of mold it so that they understand what that feels like to stack their fingertips on top of each other versus to do something like this, right? So usually if I mold it at the piano for them, and I'll do my left hand, then they're like, oh, I have multiple joints here that I can use versus feeling like I have to use my whole pinky to play it. Or even if you don't feel comfortable with touch, you can even just demonstrate them like I'm doing to you. Just explaining that we have multiple joints here and they stack up and down and we can play on all of them at the same time instead of doing this.
Do you think it's a bad thing when I tell my students when they're trying to keep that hand shape that obviously to keep their nails short, but to actually try to feel like their nail is touching the key in order to force it to go around? Because a lot of times they do play like flat, and that first knuckle is what I call dented. And to try to eliminate that dent, I try to encourage them, first of all, to cut their nails every week, but then also to try, because their nails are short, they're not actually touching their nail, but to roll it around enough that the nail is close to the key. Is that a bad way of explaining that?
I'm really glad you brought that up. And I just see like your hand over a head. And I'm like, oh, there's the question. But yes, I actually I have a parent who's very spirited about their child's education, and she wanted her daughter to cut the nail, let's see if I can find it, to a point where they say when they look at my nails, oh, that's painful. I'm like, well, that's just how my hand is shaped. But as you're mentioning, some people actually can't get their nail any lower. That's just where it is. And so what I suggested for this student, because the nail was cut as low as it could be, let me see if my light can help me here, that actually you won't be able to stack it. Can you see this? Okay. It's okay. Yeah, but then it'll actually end up looking like this. So it'll be, all of our fingers can't do this. Sometimes it looks like this. But that the whole point is that you're trying to find the fatty part of your fingertip to connect with the key. Instead of this, right? Nobody has to do this. We can all find some point on our fingertip to connect with the key, even if it looks like this or like that or like this. There's so many degrees. So it's more about finding what that looks like for that hand than saying that, everybody has to be right here at the fingertip where the nail is, because that's not possible. And I think that's something that I might not have mentioned, but with MAT, it's a huge thing to listen to your own body. And all of our bodies are saying different things, even though we're trying to get the same sound destination. I hope that helped.
Thank you.
Yes, and since I have found my slide on this, I will give you all the 10 tips at once now for you to copy or take a photo of. So here they all are. The first one being foundational skills. And that's, at every level, we can talk about foundational skills. Choose analyzing new hand, arm, or wrist motions. Thinking about the sitting position. So how high or how low do we need to be based on our torso or our leg length? And also the age matters, right? Thinking about choosing repertoire in a graded way so that we don't skip levels or skip fundamental skills that students need to know. Number 5 is mental practice or score study. It's an amazing way to incorporate theory into your lesson if you're not already doing so, and or to reinforce points that you are talking about in theory lessons. Setting clear practice time increments for students so that they know how to use their time effectively and efficiently. Considering what soreness versus pain feels like, but also sounds like when different people explain it. Focusing on the sound destination versus the journey. So just the question that was just asked, how to use the pinky. Do you want a karate chop pinky, or do you want a tip pinky, or fatty fingertip pinky? Ultimately, you want to focus on what the sound is like, because it might not look the same on everybody. Dynamic versus static stretching, and then strengthening away from the instrument. So there they all are. We made it. We made it in 50 minutes despite Zoom and all the technical difficulties. Any other questions?
Can you send us some slides about that technique that alleviated your pain?
Absolutely. Yes. Muscle activation techniques. And I will send those links for you.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Anything else? Awesome. Okay. Well, I will just go ahead. I know we have like a brief break, and I'll just tell you the format so that you all can think about how you want to do this. But for the next talk, it's actually a workshop. I actually like to be very interactive. So if you all want to kind of pick your groups and spokesperson, and if there's a microphone, that'll really help me be able to hear what some of your suggestions are. And if you didn't already, I did mention to Ashley, it's great when the group has a little bit of a heads up of what I'm going to ask, but you'll have 10 minutes to figure out your answers. Is if you have a list or a few pieces from BIPOC or female composers, that will be very important for this next exercise, is for you to kind of have a few off the top of your head. And so that's it. That's it for session 1.
Thank you.
Yeah.